They say empires crumble not from the outside, but from within, and the mighty Ottoman Caliphate, victim of its own decay, was an exception, not a rule. But then came the conspiracies, the secret plots hatched in the darkest corners of London and Paris, where power-hungry colonialists, especially Britain and France, they plotted to divide Muslim territories, shattering Arab dreams for independence, and proving that their Western-supported leaders couldn't be trusted, which only fueled the fears of Muslims everywhere. Here's how the last caliph was overthrown, ending the Khilafah, and how the last vestige of Muslim unity was sacrificed on the altar of British imperialism. It is a story of betrayal, loss, anger and sorrow, all in the name of the greater good. A greater good only for the West, that is. Empires fall from the inside, not the outside. And the mighty Ottoman Caliphate, victim of its own decay, was an exception, not a rule, because it collapsed through both internal weakness and a ruthless external conspiracy. Conspiracies emerged, secret plots brewing in London's shadows. And Paris, where power-hungry colonialists, especially Britain and France, conspired to carve up Muslim lands among themselves, betraying the illusionary hopes of the Arabs who believed they were oppressed while actually being part of a greater unity, only to be divided by Western powers, sowing discord among Muslims under the false promise of liberation, confirming the worst fears of many that their Western-backed rulers, just like the Western promises, were untrustworthy and bound to betray them. It is a story of betrayal, loss, anger and sorrow, all in the name of the greater good. A greater good, only for the West, that is. The year is 1924, the place Istanbul. The Ottoman Empire has been steadily drained of its resources. Powerless against the onslaught of European colonialism, it had seen its Arab provinces rise in revolt, its dreams of pan-Islamism dashed by the Russians, and its hopes for modernization and reform crushed by the Young Turks. The First World War had dealt it a death blow. The once proud army was demoralized, the economy shattered, and the very unity of the empire hanging by a thread. The Sultan, a powerless figurehead, looked on helplessly as the chambers of the Caliphate were taken over by the victorious Allied forces. Theirs was a victory built on deceit. Theirs was a peace that reeked of betrayal. On May 1915, the British had secured an agreement with the Russians, promising them the city of Jerusalem and parts of southern Turkey in exchange for their support during the war. Just 2 months later, they would do the same with the French, agreeing to give them the former Ottoman provinces of Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq. These agreements, known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, were a death knell for Arab aspirations for independence. For decades, the Arabs had fought alongside the British against the Ottomans, convinced that their sacrifices would be rewarded with freedom. Instead, they were being sold down the river. There was no outcry, though, from those who called themselves the champions of Islam, the Wahhabis, led by Abdulaziz ibn Saud, who aligned with British interests to secure their own authority, turning a blind eye to the collapse of the Caliphate and the dismemberment of the Muslim Ummah. They looked on as the British prepared to carve up Muslim lands and strike deals with the very enemies of Islam. Not only did they remain silent, they actively aided the British in their wars against fellow Muslims, trading unity and loyalty for power, and watching as the heart of the Ummah was dismantled piece by piece. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, committing itself to the establishment of a national home for the Jews in Palestine. For the Muslims of the world, it was a second stab in the back. The Khilafah was being dismantled while the West looked on. The final blow was delivered in November 1922 when the British government passed the Turkish National Anthem Act, which declared that henceforth the Sultan of Turkey should no longer be considered the Khalifa of the Muslims. The last caliph, a powerless old man living in exile in a palace in Paris, was reduced to tears. He sent an emotional appeal to the Muslim world, but there was no reply. The millions of Muslims who had once looked up to him as their spiritual leader were too busy fighting their own battles for survival to care. In Egypt, the British arrested hundreds of protesters. In India, the Khilafat Committee launched a mass movement, but it soon fizzled out after the British promised some limited self-rule to King Faisal in Riyadh. The Turkish National Assembly was meeting in Ankara to decide the future of the Caliphate. If it abolished the Caliphate, he said, it would be a momentous occasion in Muslim history. It would be like the fall of Rome, he said, adding ominously, it will be a calamity from which we shall never recover. How right he was. For the next day, on March 4th, the Turkish parliament declared the office of caliph vacant and abolished it. A wave of mourning swept through the Muslim world. Mosques emptied and Friday prayers were cancelled, shops closed and streets were deserted. It was as if the fate of the entire community had been decided in the twinkling of an eye. The Khilafah was no more. Yet the saddest thing was that most Muslims did not even realize what was happening. The founder of modern Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, was never a guardian of the Khilafah. He was a fierce secularist who viewed Islam as an obstacle to progress. When the moment came to choose between Islamic unity and Turkish nationalism, he chose the latter without hesitation. It was he who formally abolished the Caliphate in 1924, severing the final thread that bound the Muslim world under a single leadership. His secular republic was built on the ruins of the Caliphate, but that did not bring lasting peace or prosperity to Turkey. It made him a hero to the West, but left millions of Muslims disillusioned and dispossessed. The last caliph was overthrown by a Turk, marking a heartbreaking moment for Muslims across the globe. But in the end, who really was to blame? It was all of them, those who stood by passively as the caliphate was torn apart, betrayed, and sold off by colonial powers. Who will answer for the loss of Islamic unity, I wonder, and what will it take to restore it? As-salamu alaykum.